again, this idea of whole being exhaustion, where it wasn't just because I had a couple bad nights sleep. It was this mental, physical, emotional, spiritual depletion, as well as that continual sense of dread that I've mentioned earlier of just like not wanting to show up to work, as beautiful of mission as it was,
Yeah.
just dreading every moment.
Hi, I'm Chris LeBrun, your host of the Wholistic Productivity Podcast. As someone who's never been afraid of dreaming big and going for it all, I often find myself with a lot on my plate. I'm a husband and father, a nonprofit fundraiser, and an entrepreneur. What I've realized is my view of productivity was pretty toxic. After decades of believing that in order to do more, you had to work harder, I began to see productivity as this beautiful thing. Holistic productivity is the idea that you can accomplish your professional, personal, and purpose-driven goals in a healthy way, and doing so will make you happier and more fulfilled. Join me each week as we break down myths about productivity, share practical tips for maximizing your time, energy, and focus, and hear from others about their productivity journey. This is the Holistic Productivity Podcast. Thank you so much for being here for this episode of the Holistic Productivity Podcast. My name is Chris LeBrun. I'm a productivity coach. I'm your host, and it is making me extremely excited that you are here. I don't know how to say that any other way. I try to come up with new ways of saying that every episode. I just love that you are here. You're investing in your goals, in your future, and tonight we've got a fantastic episode for you. We're going to get to that in just a second. You know, today's conversation is about something that many of us experience, but rarely recognize until we're already deep in it. And we're talking about burnout tonight. My guest is Chelsy Tyler, a pastor, speaker, and burnout recovery advocate who's helping people rethink what it really means to live a productive life. Chelsy served as a pastor at New Hope Church in Fulton, Maryland, where much of her ministry happened not just from the platform, but in conversations, walking alongside high school students, young adults, and volunteer leaders navigating big questions about faith, purpose, pressure, and the tension between striving and rest. Through these questions and her own journey with burnout, Chelsy began to see the world and productivity differently, not as doing more or pushing harder, but as cultivating emotional health, spiritual grounding, meaningful relationships, and the rhythms of work and rest that are actually sustainable. Her work now sits at the intersection of faith and emotional well-being and human flourishing, helping people move from simply functioning to living fully and well in every area of life. Man, I love the sound of that. If you've ever felt tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, or if you've wondered why success or meaningful work still leaves you depleted, or if you've quietly asked yourself whether the pace of your life is sustainable, I think tonight's conversation with Chelsy is going to resonate deeply with you. Chelsy, welcome to the Holistic Productivity Podcast. I'm really glad you are here. Thank you so much.
I'm excited to be here too. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me, especially with sharing something like this that I think people across industries experience.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, burnout is something close to my heart with my experience in pastoral ministry. But in my conversations with people work in all different kinds of fields, it's something that many people feel, maybe they don't know how to name, let alone know what to do with. And so I'm really excited to just kind of explore that tonight.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you here. You know, we've known each other for several years. We used to work in the same building, and there was this lunch crowd that would happen in the cafeteria, and you guys were very nice to let an old fogey like me hang out with you guys. It was great. You didn't come all the time, but when you came, it was a lot of fun. And, you know, with COVID and both of us changing jobs, it's been a while. So it's been a lot of fun just to catch up with you here kind of before we hit record tonight. But Thank you so much again for doing this. And you're right. This is a very important conversation. I talk a lot about self-care, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But when people hear the word burnout, they usually imagine exhaustion.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is burnout usually about working too much and just being tired, or is it something deeper?
I have in my own discussions about burnouts as a lay person, right? I don't consider myself a psychologist who specializes in burnouts, but
Sure.
in learning a lot more about it because of my own personal experience, there's definitely the element of a physical, mental, emotional exhaustion. I would also say a spiritual exhaustion as a person
Mm,
of faith. Um, and really, at least from my experience, that exhaustion is almost whole person,
mm.
really. Like, certainly there were times when I was physically tired and definitely needed a nap. Listen, don't underestimate sleep for sure. But there's something, as you kind of mentioned earlier, that there's something about burnouts where even just getting a good night's sleep doesn't necessarily fix.
Mm.
And that's something to pay attention to. That's definitely something to pay attention to is uh, an exhaustion that almost permeates your whole being, if that doesn't sound too dramatic.
Yeah. No, no, that sounds what I would expect. I'm sure that there are some people who are experiencing burnout before they even realize it. So from your perspective, what did it actually feel like for you, even before you had
Mhm.
the right language to sort of name it?
Right, yes. So for me, I guess I started experiencing burnout in my very first adulting job, right? So my first adulting job in my early 20s, literally 21, I had just turned 21. I got hired in my first pastoral role.
Mm.
And it was also it was not only my first big girl job, but also my first pastoral role. So there was a lot of figuring out what it looks like to no longer be a student, but to work full time and adjusting to that life transition, as well as adjusting to the demands of pastoral ministry.
Mm.
And so in my very first year of pastoral ministry, I was basically just trying to do the most because I thought that's what my
Sure.
job description required. I was like, I think this is just how pastoral ministry is supposed to go. And so if I'm not doing all these things, I'm failing or whatever.
Yeah.
And so after that first year, I experienced burnouts, even though I didn't really have the language to name it. I didn't know anything about burnout at the time. I just had that like whole being exhaustion. I was experiencing like this dread to just come to work every day, even if it was incredible work. Just at the time, I was a children's ministries pastor.
Mm.
So there was a lot of nurturing faith for kids all the way from birth to eighth grade, and not just
Wow.
the kids themselves, but also ministering to their families.
Mm.
And there's a lot of beauty to that work. And I dreaded
Right.
every day showing up. And so I just thought there was like something wrong with me. Like maybe I don't have enough like stamina or something, or I just need
Yeah.
to improve my physical and mental endurance or whatever. But that's just kind of how it started for me. And I had no idea that it was the beginnings of burnout.
I think that's you said something that I think a lot of us feel. We just assume that there's something wrong with us
Hmm.
rather than
Hmm.
that there is something that we're experiencing that is not right.
Hmm.
So what made you actually realize that you were experiencing burnout, and what were some of the signs looking back on it now that maybe you missed that you should have noticed at the
Hmm.
time?
Hmm. I think I didn't actually put words to that burnout experience until much later, like,
Mm.
I don't know, years later.
Wow.
Because so I was only in that role for literally 2 years. After that first year and experiencing like that whole being exhaustion, I was contemplating quitting. And I had to actually speak with the pastoral staff I worked with at the time. They talked me off the ledge after year one. And so I was like, okay,
Wow.
like maybe I just need to adjust to this because it is a time of trend. I'm figuring it out, But year two came along and it's just like, ain't nobody talking me off this ledge, okay? Like I'm gone. I'm gone.
Yeah.
um and so that had its own time of transition into like just figuring out my life in general. But yeah, it wasn't until again like years later that I guess I discovered like this language of burnout, whether through other people I was talking with who were using that language of burnout. And it was just like, maybe that's what I was experiencing at the time.
Mm,
And then when I got into my most recent role in pastoral ministry, that's where that language and that um, um, concepts really solidified in my mind, where it's just like, okay, this is what's going on because I got into my next pastoral role and it was a lot of the same experience.
mm,
And that could be due to a lot of different things at the time. Like there were poor boundaries that I had between myself and work. There were unrealistic expectations I had for myself.
mm,
There were some broken systems in place that could have been changed on a bigger level beyond myself. But putting that all together under that language of burnout was, I guess, both scary to kind of finally name it,
mm,
but also a relief almost to name it because it's just like, okay, this is what's going on. I guess some of the things that, looking back, I wish I had paid attention to, some signs, especially early on when I didn't have the language, was just like, again, this idea of whole being exhaustion, where it wasn't just because I had a couple bad nights sleep, it was this mental, physical, emotional, spiritual depletion.
mm.
Um, and as well as that continual sense of dread that I've mentioned earlier of just like not wanting to show up to work, as beautiful a mission as it was,
Yeah.
just dreading every moment. Um, and even experiencing like a kind of compassion fatigue, where for
Mm,
some of us in giving professions,
yeah.
because we might give so much and maybe not set proper boundaries to receive back or pour back into ourselves, we can almost like experience the opposite of compassion, where it's just this apathy.
Mm,
And you don't really mean, at least in
yeah.
my experience, I didn't really
Right.
mean to be apathetic, especially in something as compassion driven as
Yeah.
pastoral ministry.
Right.
But it just kind of happened because of that continual whole being exhaustion experience. So those were some things that I wish I had paid attention to early on to try to catch it earlier
Yeah.
and discover, okay, what are some things I can do about this?
If someone had seen you at that time, what would they have seen on the outside that was maybe different from what you were experiencing internally? Were you able to hide it? I guess is
Oh,
or
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not proud of that.
Right,
That's
right.
not my proudest moments, like just kind of faking it till I made it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I also it's due to my personality that I'm an internal processor, so I'm less likely to talk about things as
Mm,
openly as I'm experiencing them, maybe after the fact, once I've had the time to process, but to also just having this unrealistic expectation of myself as a pastor at the time to just be like this strong faith figure who's here to bolster everyone else's faith
yeah.
and their own struggles, you know what I mean? So that became this perfect storm of just like, let me pretend that I'm not
Yeah.
drowning on the inside, even though I really am drowning on the inside.
Yeah. Well, and I've worked in ministry for almost 30 years, not in pastoral ministry on the nonprofit side,
Mhm.
fundraising and all of that. But I think you're absolutely right. We get this sense that because we are doing important work that has
Mhm.
meaning and value and is giving back to the community and to the congregation and to the world in many cases, that again, it's something that's wrong with us because this is meaningful work. How would it not fill you, right? To be
Right.
ministering to people. But I wonder this, are pastors more susceptible to burnout? Is there a higher burnout rate for pastors and other positions, those of us in ministry, because of those things? We can't talk about it, we feel, or we just feel like it should be something that we can do. I mean, do you know anything about
Yeah.
those? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that pastors, especially, but anyone in giving professions, or maybe not even in a giving profession, but in a caregiving role,
Yeah.
or even in a romantic relationship that can feel demanding, that burnout can be experienced. And that's something that, as I was learning more about burnout, that was both fascinating and I guess almost reassuring in a weird way that it wasn't just me, but that it was something that can happen to anyone who is in a role of giving, whether professionally or personally, romantically, whatever. But
Yeah.
with pastors, especially, man, there were so many statistics I had seen of these high rates of burnout among pastors across denominations. Like, this
Yeah.
isn't even just like a single denomination thing. Like, it
Yeah.
really is actually alarming, I think, of how almost universal, at least in American society, how prevalent burnout is among pastors, unfortunately.
Well,
So yeah, it was both concerning because it's just like, man, why is this such a prevalent occurrence among pastors when you hope it wouldn't be? But also almost reassuring that it's just like, okay, I'm not like this outlier. There is something beyond just me going on. And I think I needed to hear that and understand that it wasn't just a me problem.
yeah. I've always thought that pastors have it rough because, church members are always watching you. You're in the public eye in that congregation, and everyone
Mhm,
has a different expectation of how a good pastor, quote unquote, is supposed to act, and the things
mhm,
that they're supposed to do and not do. And I imagine that there's some people who are not just looking at a pastor and judging them, unfortunately, but they're trying to be friends with the pastor because of the
mhm,
position that he or she has,
mhm,
rather
mhm,
than just because they like the person and they want, or they feel like they have to be friends because she's the pastor. I got to be friends with her.
mhm,
Um, you
mhm,
know,
mhm.
but is it difficult for pastors to develop close friendships within their congregation that really could be that sense of safety, and when
Mhm,
you're going through burnout,
mhm,
so somebody that you could
mhm.
talk to and be open with? But is that harder for a pastor to do? Let's pause here for a quick break. We'll be right back. If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of trying every to-do list or project management app, you know how exhausting it can be. You download the app, you set it up, enter all your data, and then scramble to cancel it before the trial ends. Trust me, I've been there and it's no fun. That's why I love Efficient.app. Alex and Andra, a husband and wife team, have spent over a decade testing and reviewing software of all types so you don't have to. Calendars, project management, banking, planners, email marketing, you name it, they've covered it with honest reviews and side by side comparisons. And they don't sugarcoat it. If a tool isn't worth your time, they tell you straight up. I've personally found their reviews super helpful when I was trying to sort through different project management apps. It saved me a ton of time and frustration. Best of all, they often have special deals on the tools they recommend so that you can save money. I'm especially grateful to Efficient.app because they've been supporting the Holistic Productivity Podcast since the very beginning. The best way to check them out and support the podcast is through the link in the show notes. So next time you're looking for software, let Efficient.app do the work for you. Trust me, you will not regret it.
I would say yes, at least in my experience. And those social connections are vital for any human being.
Sure.
But especially, as you mentioned, I think especially when you're going through burnouts, in my experience, that's when I needed that the most. And in some ways, because of the shame I had associated with my burnout experience, it
Mm.
was isolating. And I
Yeah.
really did need to have additional support. So for my experience when it came to like establishing genuine friendships, I think because I specifically in my most recent role was youth and young adult pastor and being within that age range of young adults myself, I fortunately did have the opportunity to have some good friendships.
Mm.
And I also recognized that the dynamic between me and my friends who were also like my church members, it was something I had to keep in mind
Yeah.
because while I'm their friend and a lot of conversations we had were very open and honest and authentic, I also had to be cautious about um maybe accidentally or unintentionally saying something as a leader of faith
Yeah.
that might strain the relationship, you know,
Yeah.
or strain their relationship with the church. And I don't want to say that was necessarily like that I had to put a filter on. In some ways, I think a lot of pastors do feel like they need to put filters on because of
Yeah.
that. But I did really have to be mindful of like, I want to be authentic. And in many times, many ways, I was. And I
Yeah.
also have to be aware that the friend hat, it also comes with a pastor hat.
Yeah.
I need to balance both.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've felt that even on my side of ministry because I have donors that will friend me on Facebook, even though I don't see them every day. They
Mhm,
see my social media, and so I've had to, think about that. And look,
mhm,
I'm the stupid guy on Facebook. I'm making the jokes, and but I have to think about it sometimes. Okay, is this something
mhm,
that how is a donor going to see this? And that's
mhm, mhm,
yeah,
mhm,
that's a lot of I don't know pressure, but it's something else to consider. And I
mhm,
imagine if you are hurting, you're going through burnout, you don't want to have those extra sort of guardrails. You just want to have friends,
mhm.
and somebody that you can talk to.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And fortunately, um, in my particular local church context, when I was first kind of debating how open I should be about my burnout experience, that local church context was one that really did crave and nurture authenticity.
Mm.
So there actually were a couple sermons I had preached very openly about my burnout experience, obviously
Yeah.
not with like, too much hanging out your dirty laundry kind of
Right.
thing, but appropriately yet authentically so. And that was a challenging step for me to take initially because it was again like I was dealing with those unrealistic expectations I put on myself of a pastor needs to look like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I in my internal state do not look like those things. Like, will the people be kind of turned off by that? Would they rather have some person of stronger faith to kind
Mm.
of guide them in their moments of struggle? Like, and fortunately, though, it was such a blessing that being able to speak openly about my experience from the pulpits and in small group or one-on-one conversations was something that was so welcomed
Yeah.
in that context. There were so many people who would come up to me after those messages and be like, "Wow, thank you so much because I've been experiencing the same thing and I didn't really know like what to do with it. I don't really know how faith played into it, like all of these things." And so it became that catalyst to um kind of journey together more authentically as a church community and as well like help me realize I did have more social support than maybe I had assumed if I just kept everything to myself.
Yeah. And you mentioned something, and you mentioned it before as well, but I think tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, for people of faith, anytime we have any of these mental health challenges,
Mhm.
the one of the things that we automatically can revert to is I'm not strong enough spiritually, or my
Mhm.
faith is not strong enough. If I really believed more, then I wouldn't be experiencing this. And so there's even that added extra layer of self-doubt and
Mhm.
struggle. I mean, do faith communities unintentionally reinforce burnout? Is that safe to say?
I can see that. I can see that because there can be a very easy, I think, spiritualizing away, I guess, of
Mm,
certain mental health challenges and including burnouts, where it's just like, oh, just pray more
yeah,
or just like do more things for the Lord or read your Bible more or whatever, and
yeah,
it'll go away kind of thing. And certainly, including in my experience, my faith, things like prayer and engaging in God's word, those were vital for me to
yeah,
experience recovery.
yeah.
So let me not downplay those, but the ditch on the other side of the road does become spiritualizing it away. And actually, like, I just recently began writing a chapter for a young adult devotional
Mm,
that will be coming out in 2027 that looks at all different kinds of questions that young adults tend to wrestle with. But one of them was, what happens to my faith in burnout? And I was
oh,
exploring this idea of like people assume, at least in my experience and my conversations with those who have experienced burnout, that burnout is like a loss of faith when really burnout is a loss of capacity. It's kind of
mm,
like if you have a joint strain or a muscle strain. Like I like to work out. I like to do things like strength training and
yeah,
running, things that can be kind of hard on your knees depending on what you're doing. That strain in my knee, that pain, doesn't necessarily mean like my knee has disappeared or the
mm,
strength in my
right.
knee has evaporated. It's a signal, this sign that there's
Mm,
a loss of capacity happening. And it's
mm,
something that I should listen to because if I try to push through this loss of capacity that's occurring, that's just going to prolong damage. You're going
yeah,
to incur more injury. And so I feel like burnout is a lot like that, where it doesn't mean your faith is somehow defective or somehow failing, but just there's a little bit of a loss of capacity going on. And it's just this sign not to push through and necessarily do more because what if that prolongs damage? But
yeah,
instead, what if it's a sign to like do a little less, to get the whole body rest you need
yeah,
to be able to regain that capacity? I wonder if faith communities kind of saw burnout from that perspective, if that could maybe reduce some of that spiritualizing away that might happen or that shaming that I know I experienced in my
yeah.
faith journey because of that, and instead maybe see it from a different lens.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. Pastors, people in ministry, we have this deep sense of calling. We're not doing it for the money, obviously, right? So it's a sense of calling in the work. But there's a lot of people who feel a deep calling. Teachers,
Mhm.
other professions. So and with that, we can get our self-worth and our sense of identity tied up into the work that we do in many
Mhm.
professions. So how is that what does that look like for someone whose self-worth is tied with this sense of being needed? How do they begin untangling that if they suspect that they're dealing with burnout or something along those lines? Let's pause here for a quick break. We'll be right back. Living with pain is no fun at all. Whether it's sore muscles from a workout, nagging joints, or even stress that just won't leave you alone. That's why I love Little Golden Shepherd. They make all natural butters from organic herbs and essential oils, formulated to ease pain, reduce stress, and even soothe sensitive skin. I use the muscle butter after tough workouts, and the joint butter is perfect for my knees, which somehow were bad even when I was a kid. I'm so grateful to have Little Golden Shepherd sponsoring the Holistic Productivity Podcast. The way they support the show is super simple. Every time you shop through the link in the show notes, a portion of your order helps keep this podcast going. And here's the best part. If you use the promo code WHOLEPROD, you'll save 15% on your first order. That's promo code WHOLEPROD, WHOLPROD. Try Little Golden Shepherd today. You're going to love it as much as I do, and your muscles will too.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was also my experience of like my sense of identity that I think really many people tie their sense of identity to their job.
Yeah.
Like when you meet someone for the first time, one of those first questions is, well, what do you do for
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
living kind of thing? And I'm a dentist, I'm a pastor, I'm a construction worker, whatever.
Yeah.
And, but that notice that language tends to not be like, oh, I do pastoral work or I do dentistry or I do construction work. It's not like this external action outside of the person. It is this identifying language. I am this
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there can be a lot of beauty to kind of putting your whole self into a job for sure. And on the ditch on the other side of the road can be that identifying a little too much to where it's just like, oh, like for example, I am no longer in my pastoral role. Does that mean I have no identity?
Right. Right.
Of course not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to especially people experiencing burnout and maybe tying their identities so much to their work, to kind of just take that step back. And at least for me as a person of faith, to really realign my identity with my values. So as a person of faith, my identity had to really be realigned with who God says that I am. And God identified me and created me long before I ever adopted a pastoral role. So
Yeah.
obviously there's so much more to me in his perspective than my job as a pastor or my job as whatever. And really my identity, according to him, is being his child, being his friend, being the one he made in his image. When I leaned back towards those values that define my identity, it was a little easier to make this transition career wise. That, maybe some people in burnout feel like they do need to quit their jobs.
Yeah.
Maybe, or maybe you might need to stay. Who knows?
Right.
But in
Right.
in my experience, I felt like God was leading me towards a career shift. And had I maintained that almost like codependency of my identity to like my job, I feel like it would have been that much harder to exit that role and step
Yeah.
into something new that I really was convinced that God was calling me into.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute, what you're doing now. But one of the things that I think has changed in my lifetime is how we talk about any type of mental illness, but burnout especially. And so, I mean, I've heard a lot in my life about the midlife crisis. That's a term that we've seemed comfortable with for almost as long as I can remember. And so first off, is burnout and midlife crisis the same thing? How are they related? Or for that matter, is midlife crisis a real thing, or is it just an excuse for guys to go out and buy a sports car? These are the questions that I have.
Listen, there are quarter life crises now,
Yeah,
okay? Among
well,
people in their
that's
20 something.
yeah.
Like I feel like there's across demographics, in my experience working with high schoolers, they
Yeah.
experience burnout like you wouldn't believe how many 15-year-olds I've spoken with who are stressed out of their minds.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you are 15.
Yeah.
Like, you got your whole life ahead of you. Okay. It doesn't have to be that deep. You know what I mean? Like, so conversations with 15-year-olds, 20 somethings in their quarter life crises, 40-year-old single parents going through divorce. Like,
Yeah.
we're again across industries, across demographics. I've seen people just in this constant state of busyness and frenetic pace that often has translated to burnout and this
Yeah.
whole being exhaustion and being in that spot of like, where do I go from here? So yeah, I think this experience of burnout really is possible no matter your life circumstance if there is this like prolonged sense of stress, depletion, numbness, apathy, dread.
Yeah.
That can happen when you're 15 or you're 55. So it's a thing.
Yeah. And I have to catch myself when those younger generations are saying, talking about their stress, just because that wasn't a stress for me at their age, or just because I didn't feel stress at their age, doesn't mean that it's not real for them. And,
Exactly.
they're facing different challenges, but they're still feeling them the same way that I
Hmm.
might be feeling my challenges at 50. But
Hmm.
the other thing I've noticed about the younger generations that I really appreciate, we're not going to just dog on them all show long, but they are so much more willing to open up and
Hmm.
talk about their mental health than the Gen Xers, and I'll raise my hand, and certainly more than the baby boomers, right? Because,
Hmm.
and that's a good thing, so why is there so much more willingness to talk about mental health struggles with younger generations? um, what are they getting right in that area? What can we older
Hmm.
folk learn from them?
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree that one of the things that I admired the most working with Gen Z and a little bit of Gen Alpha, and my own peers as millennials is that openness,
Hmm.
to speaking about these challenges. I think part of it is, um, that language is more available to them, than perhaps older generations. Plus, the stigma around admitting to mental health that maybe was more prevalent, for older generations when they were younger is not as much of a stigma for younger
Yeah.
generations now. In fact, it's so normal
Yeah.
to talk about these things. Like, I can't tell you how many young people I walked with who are dealing with like severe depression, suicidal ideation, very serious mental health journeys. And, that didn't happen in isolation. Their families were dealing with that too. And having to approach these kinds of things in different ways with the young person or their friends or their siblings,
Yeah.
and maybe their parents who are just like at a loss because they don't have the language, they haven't really learned the emotional intelligence skills, all those things. So I feel like for all generations, but especially those who didn't grow up with the language or the normalcy of talking about mental health, is kind of just starting with like mental health is just as much a part of our whole being health
Yeah.
as anything else. I hope each of us are going to our doctors for that annual physical, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just a basic part of preventative care.
Yeah.
And similarly, I hope we would be just as willing to take those regular check ins with ourselves mentally with a therapist or other mental health professional, or at the very least, like with people we trust in our own circles,
Yeah.
just giving ourselves permission to just be like, hey, this is just as normal and vital a part of my health
Yeah.
as getting my teeth cleaned at the dentist, as like seeing my primary care provider on an annual basis at minimum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's normalize it.
Yeah. And I think in a weird way, for all the knocks that we give on Hollywood for the culture that they bring, I think we've seen in movies and TV a lot more openness about
Hmm.
quote unquote regular people going to see a therapist or talking about
Hmm.
their work in therapy or talking with a counselor. So, again, in a weird way, that has probably helped to normalize some of that in our own life as well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, um, I and some of my other pastoral colleagues who speak with therapists, like we would go up front, preach a sermon, and we would talk about like, hey, I was talking to my therapist the other day.
Yeah.
Like again, just as if I was talking to like my doctor the other day or
Yeah.
like whoever I talked to on the other, you know what I mean?
Because
Like just
it was your
yeah,
doctor that you were talking to.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that um especially within faith communities, we were talking about
Yeah.
uh, the the perhaps added temptation faith communities might have to almost spiritualize away mental health. I think for faith communities or any person of faith, part of that normalizing process is faith leaders, whether they are pastors or volunteer ministry leaders, whoever, those who have a sphere of influence in the faith community, to normalize those conversations as well.
Yeah. Tell me about your recovery. What surprised you most about recovery? What was it like to go through that, or as you are going through that? And
Mhm.
was there something that people recommended that you do that just didn't seem to work, right? Like they were
Mhm.
well-meaning and oh, just do this, what did some of that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. So, what kind of catalyzed me to try to enter into a state of recovery? Because I had struggled with burnout and was just kind of like plateauing in that place of exhaustion and depletion for many years.
Yeah.
What kind of catalyzed that was my experience actually, like my mental health got worse.
Mm,
And I didn't think that was possible, okay,
right.
because it
Yeah.
seemed pretty bad,
Yeah.
but it had gotten worse. And to the point where, like my primary care provider was actually concerned, like,
Mm,
we need to talk about this. Like, we got to actually do something.
yeah.
And it was just like, okay, I was not expecting this. So it compelled me to take a different approach. In my particular work, I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical.
Mm,
I know not all professions perhaps provide that, but
right.
my role provided that. And so I took that time away.
Mm,
And that was like when you're triaging people who are in the ER,
yeah.
like this was like okay, she's bleeding out. Like we need to do something. She's bleeding out, so the short-term solution in this beginnings of recovery was taking some time away in this
Yeah.
form sabbatical. The long-term solution that I'll talk about a little bit later was a little different. So there I had to realize that this wasn't just like, oh, I take the sabbatical and I'm automatically better. No,
Right.
this is
Yeah.
just you're bleeding out. We're going to take care of this first. We'll talk about PT later
Yeah. Yeah.
before we discharge you like X number of months later. You're bleeding out. We're just going to save you right now. So that first stage was sabbatical. And at the time, and I still am trying to finish my master's degree. I'm doing a Master of Arts in
Okay.
Religion.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, doing that while working full time, especially as a pastor, did not necessarily help the burnout, right?
Sure. Yeah. Shocking.
So when I began my sabbatical, I was like, I didn't intend to necessarily use it as a time of rest. I intended to be like, oh, wow, I have time off of work. I can finally like finish this degree and
Yeah.
just get it off my plate before I have to go back to work. So I was trying to get the thesis done because my program requires writing
Mm,
this thesis. And every time I sat down and worked on it, it was like running my head up against a wall. Like every time
mm.
I barely made any progress. And when I prayed about it, God was like, you know how this is a sabbatical? You probably need a sabbatical, not just from work, but from school, okay?
Yeah.
And at first, I was salty, like super salty. I was like, what do you mean, God? Like, this is a prime time to finish this thing because I don't want to have to delay it to when I'm back at work and like all this stuff. But as I became increasingly convinced that like he was wanting me to do less rather than more,
Mm,
right? Which goes back to our conversation earlier for people of faith who might be experiencing burnout. The solution might be pray more, like volunteer more, like all this, read your Bible more, more,
yeah.
more, more.
Yeah. Yeah.
God was like, oh no, do less. You
Yeah.
trying to do more. Do less, okay? So I finally like decided to kind of lean into the whole point of sabbatical, right? Which is,
Right.
rest. And for me, what helped catalyze me again more towards a state of recovery that I don't think I'm fully at yet. I feel
Mm,
like I'm on the way, but I'm not 100% there, which is, that's just part of the recovery
sure.
journey.
Sure.
But at the time, I read like a book on boundaries that
Mm,
showed me, dang, maybe one of like the key underlying things was having really poor boundaries with myself and work,
yeah.
really poor expectations with myself and work, and what it looks like to have healthier boundaries around that. I read another book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, highly
Mm,
recommended,
yeah.
that, as the title suggests, really tries to pull people back from this very much culture of hurry that we
Yeah.
find ourselves in, this perpetual busyness or state of frantic pace. Um, and he actually gives practical suggestions as far as how to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life.
Yeah. That's a good book.
Um,
I've read that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It is a great book. It is a
Yeah. I'm
great
trying to
book.
remember the guy's name. He's got 3 names. I can't remember what they are though.
John Mark Comer.
There it is. Yeah. Yeah. John Mark Comer.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of self-educating regarding the underlying things beneath my burnout. There was a lot of like coping mechanisms that actually fed into what I needed, like continuing to exercise more for my mental health, honestly, than my physical health. Speaking with my therapist was vital. Meeting regularly with my primary care provider. Um, Sleep, like I had sleep issues for many years that I just never got around to addressing because I was too busy to do so.
Yeah.
But finally being on sabbatical was like, okay, let me get to this. And I actually ended up working with a sleep specialist and have since like had some really great improvements with my sleep.
Mm,
So all of these, again, self-educating, continuing to stay connected with professionals in healthcare, doing things that fed into me and took care of my physical health, mental health, spiritual health. All those things are very vital to triage, right? To stop the bleeding.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
we haven't gotten to the PT yet. So that was very important to stop the bleeding. But then, at the end of that sabbatical came like this, okay, you're out of the ER, you're out of the ICU, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What comes next? And that's where I had very honest conversations with God, with my family, with my therapist, with my PCP about like, you might need to switch careers.
Mm,
And again, not all people who experience burnout might have to quit their jobs, but in
yeah.
my experience, like that had to be part of the long term was like, you know, you gotta find something else. And that
Yeah.
was a really hard decision to make because I, as again many people of faith do, tried to like spiritualize it away, like, oh, if I leave it means I'm forsaking God's call in my
Right.
life, and
Right.
like all these things. But in my own reflections and prayers about it, it's just like, no, like the calling God places on someone's life is so much more than just any single job.
Yeah.
It can look like so many things in the course of one's life. And as long as I'm faithful to whatever direction God might be leading to at that time,
Yeah.
that is being faithful to the call.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I've since transitioned out of my pastoral role, still looking for what comes next. But I definitely feel like I'm in that, I guess, PT phase that like we're continuing further down that road of recovery, continuing to educate myself on what it looks like to recover from like a constantly frayed nervous system, for example,
Mm,
because burnout really affects, again, your not just your minds but your whole body, and what it looks like to help your body and mind bounce back from that. um Again, continuing to speak with my therapist, like really fostering these social connections that I didn't have as much because of the whole friend hat and pastor hat
right.
existing at the same time. Like now we can just be a friend.
Right.
So yeah, those were all the things that I think have really helped me get further along on the journey of recovery.
Yeah.
Um, Again, not doing more. You were talking about like some unhelpful things people were suggesting, not necessarily
Yeah.
praying more
Yeah. Yeah.
or studying the Bible more or whatever, but actually doing less, changing the pace, having wiser boundaries. All these things were super vital to be in a much better state than where I was even just like 6 months ago.
And now you're doing some speaking and work with others who are experiencing burnout. What are the types of issues that you're addressing, and how do you think that your journey with burnout and recovery shapes your ability to guide someone or to mentor them as they're just sort of realizing and coming into the beginning part of this journey of experiencing their own burnout?
Right, right. Yes. You know, being able to be at the spot of recovery in itself was just like mind blowing to me because when my burnout was at its deepest, I actually had conversations with other pastors at the time who did go through burnout and experienced like a total 180. And I was like, that sounds really nice for you,
How can
okay?
I get that?
But if that's going to happen for me. But then it did eventually happen for me.
Yeah.
And so, like, to be, as I mentioned before, like writing about burnouts,
Yeah.
my long term plan to actually establish my own small business and burnout recovery life coaching, to come to this spot, I think gives me more, not just credibility, but a real firsthand understanding
Sure.
for those experiencing burnouts that, just like I did, probably would never guess that they could ever come to this place of recovery, that they would ever see the other side of it. Because I know what that's like. I didn't think I would either. I thought that God could do it for other people, but maybe not for me. But now that I've seen that happen, it's just like, okay, it gives me hope for my own future, but I also hope it positions me to be able to help other people know too, like, it can happen. No, really, I'm not lying to you. It really can happen.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
you might feel really skeptical about that. I was there too. And it really can happen. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I think they need to hear that, because even if I were trained as a psychiatrist or a counselor or something like that, if I haven't actually gone through it, it's a lot harder for me to talk about
Mhm.
from that place of experience. Now, I know that you don't have to have that. And look, when I worked at summer camp years ago, I was teaching people how to water ski, but I couldn't do it myself for a long time, right? You know,
Wow.
I could tell them, "Oh, you just got to do this." But when I went and tried to do it, it didn't work. So I know that you can do that, but there's so much more legitimacy when they can see that I'm skiing around the
Mhm.
lake, right? You know, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, Chris can help us with that because he's been there, he's done that." So I think that certainly adds some legitimacy, and not that you want to have those type of credentials, but you know, again, it's helpful to be able to, even from a place of empathy, to just say, "Hey,
Mhm.
I get it, I understand."
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And even understands like perhaps some of the deepest and darkest parts of burnout and the skepticism of like, will I ever see the other side of it?
Yeah.
Um, in some ways, I'm grateful, but not super grateful to have gone through that experience, right? Because I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to go
Yeah.
through that again, but I'm in a way grateful to have gone through this because I know there are so many
Yeah.
who experience burnouts and so many who, like me, don't have hope that
Uh,
things could ever get better. But it's just like, it being able to have the experience allows me to come alongside them and be like, yeah, I get it. And hope is possible.
yeah. That's great. Now you mentioned something a couple times. You talked about productivity, or you didn't maybe use that word. I know you've used it in the past and in some of the talking that we've done, but how did this shape or reshape your understanding of productivity and how it's not just about doing more. I mean, that's what we talk about in holistic productivity.
Mhm.
So it's obviously something that I agree with wholeheartedly, but I'd love to hear maybe how your definition of productivity has shifted through this process of burnout. And what did that definition change? What did that mean for you now that you've kind of gone through that?
Yeah, yeah. So I am a very task-oriented person.
Yeah.
I know how to have high output, okay? I know how to be productive
Yeah.
in that output sense, both as a professional and as a person of faith, like, oh yeah, let's pray more and let's volunteer more and let's
Yeah.
do more for God and all these things. And like let's meet the deadlines at work and do all these things. So, it's been really eye-opening to shift my understanding of productivity, not measured by output necessarily, but measured by sustainability,
Mm.
both from a professional sense where it's just like, at least in my work as a pastor, okay, do we have to like have three different social events in the same month and a service project and all these like do we need to have a really detailed structure for the whatever service projects, you know what I mean, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
or can we streamline some things? What would it look like to make this sustainable,
Yeah.
to hit some vital goals and objectives for this particular event or Bible study or what have you, but do it in a way that doesn't necessarily mean high outputs. It can still be high performance for sure,
Sure. Yeah.
but not necessarily mean like this mountain high output necessarily.
Yeah.
And translating that spiritually, right? Where it's not necessarily doing more spiritually, but what would it look like to have sustainability in spirituality, to balance those rhythms of work and rest as a professional and as a person of faith? Because at some point, if I just prioritize high output all the time, again, I'm going to lose capacity. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
able to keep that pace. And so again, just like that injured knee, just because it's not doing more or it doesn't have that same output that it had before the injury, that doesn't mean it's like failing somehow.
Yeah.
But that I have to keep in mind how my capacity changes in any given season and adjust accordingly. And it can still be high performance,
Yeah.
even if the amounts of output might change
Yeah.
depending on my capacity.
Well, and I talk about self-care so much because if we're run down, if we're burned out, we can't operate at that peak performance and we
Mhm.
can't accomplish the things that help us reach our goals. And then we feel like we're stuck in this death spiral because we're not
Mhm.
achieving our goals, because we're not doing more. How does this? I think you've talked about this, but you see alignment with that and what you're experiencing with this burnout recovery, and what role do you think self-care needs to play in our everyday lives?
Yes, for sure. In my again, when my burnout got it was at its worst, the triaging that had to happen was essentially an extended time of self-care. And even
Mm,
though like now I'm in a period of recovery, that self-care is still just as vital.
yeah.
So for me, it's been understanding that rest is not necessarily earned when you work hard enough. Like, no, the rest is necessary to
Yeah.
do the work. These rhythms of work and rest come together.
Hmm.
Like, even just apart from a burnout sense, like we all need sleep and we all
Yeah.
need a certain adequate amount of sleep. You
Yeah.
don't earn sleep, y'all. I hope y'all listening, watching this, don't feel like you gotta earn your 10 o'clock bedtime or whatever. Like, oh no, let me make sure I get this report done and then I can earn my 10 p.m. No, go to bed, okay? Like, we don't earn rest.
Yeah.
We need it to be able to reach our
Yeah.
goals and perform at a peak level,
Absolutely.
and just to be well.
Yeah. It's been such a journey for me. I say all the time that I'm a recovering workaholic.
Same.
Yeah, because I I have poured so much into work in my younger years, and it has taken me decades to figure out
Mm-hmm.
that that's not healthy for me. It's not actually good for my employer, because now they start expecting that when it's not sustainable. And
Mm-hmm.
so that has really been a journey long before this idea of holistic productivity was even on my radar. Was just, man, I can't keep this up. And because I'm pouring so much into it. So I like to say I'm a recovering workaholic. I probably, if I'm realistic, I've just shifted some of the ways that I'm working, but it's for
Mm-hmm.
things that matter to me. It's for things that
Right.
are important to me. And so they have purpose in my life, and they're actually refreshing me in some way because they're meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I still need the sleep and all of that, but yeah, so it's been a huge journey for me to come to understand that, and I'm probably not all the way there yet, but we're
Yeah.
working on it. And that's what this is. It's constantly learning and growing so that we can do better tomorrow.
And I think that goes back to having a different lens with which to see productivity. Like the that book we were talking about earlier, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. One of the practical steps that the author John Mark Comer recommends is having a schedule, but not just for work, okay? Like he actually recommends first put in the stuff that you like need, okay? Actually put those 8 hours of sleep on your calendar.
Yep.
Put that dinner time with your family on the calendar. If you're
Yep.
a person of faith, put that church time on there, right? Like actually putting the things that you value most
Yeah.
first, and then fill it in with work, fill it in with your hobbies, you know? And what if that is productivity? Not like my booked 9 to 5 with all these meetings
Yep.
and discussions with executives and volunteer training, like, all these things for work. You need to do those things. And what would it mean if productivity was living according to my values
Mm.
and having a calendar and a schedule that reflects prioritizing those values?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, we are on the same wavelength. I love it. It's it's fantastic. So for someone who is feeling the symptoms, maybe they're listening to you and they're saying, "Man, that describes what I'm feeling or what I'm experiencing with burnout or any other mental health struggles." What's the best thing that they can do? And I know that not everybody in their job has a sabbatical available
Right, right,
to
right.
them. So what are some suggestions of things that you can recommend that they do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At the very least, I would suggest speaking with a mental health professional, with
Mm.
their primary care provider, because that I think is vital to one, just understanding what you're going through, examining perhaps some underlying things that might be causing it, naming some things that are not necessarily your fault, right? That are external to you and that you don't have to carry because it's not yours to carry.
Yeah.
Um, maybe talking about medication. Some people benefit from taking medication to help with the anxiety and depression they might experience with burnout. But I recognize some people might have limited access to healthcare as well. So at the very least, just inviting someone else to come alongside you, whether
Yeah.
that is a therapist or medical professional or a friend, a parent,
Yeah.
a colleague, someone you trust, and just
Spouse.
kind of having that conversation so that, again, you're not alone, because it can be very isolating to
Yeah.
just go through this by yourself or think it's just your fault. Like, no, talk to somebody, invite someone in. That's where I would recommend someone to start.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story. I think that, again, just normalizes it. It gives people who are struggling with that, should I acknowledge this? Should I talk about it? Or do I even know that that I'm struggling with
Mm-hmm.
this? It
Mm-hmm.
just makes it easier for the next person to come along and get the help that they need. So thank you for sharing your story, both with others, your congregation, but also here on the podcast. I really appreciate that so much. And I end every interview with what I call the questions. These are rapid fire. They're inspired by James Lipton, host of Inside the Actors Studio. And so we're going to go through these. I know you've looked at them, you've seen them, you've got your
Mm-hmm.
answers already. We're going to go, Chelsy, what motivates you?
I think what motivates me is reaching a place of thriving.
Mm,
And I think that's where I find myself in the state of burnout recovery, is
mm,
this longing for thriving, as well as realizing that thriving is much like a holistic productivity advocates, really is holistic. Like
mm,
I'm not just looking for vocational thriving, although that's obviously an important part of my journey now. But what does it look like to thrive in my sleep habits? What does it look
yeah.
like to thrive in my social connections? What
Mm.
does it look like to thrive in my faith? So I think that's definitely a big motivator for me at this point.
What discourages you?
I think people or processes or systems that don't acknowledge you as a human being.
Mm,
Like we were talking about productivity as high outputs,
mm,
and I get irked by whether they're churches or like corporations or what have you, that just like all they want is what you can produce.
mm,
And they don't care that you are a human who comes to work with like your mom just called you the other night saying that she has cancer. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like that's what I think is most discouraging, is when people, processes, systems, or organizations don't recognize that you are a human.
One word that describes you at your best.
Growing,
Mm,
which I'm grateful for in this particular juncture, um, because when I was deepest in my burnout, it was the total opposite. It was just like stunted in
mm,
so many ways.
yeah.
But now I'm so grateful to be in a state where I can honestly say, yeah, I think we're growing.
One word that describes you at your worst.
Numb.
Mm,
That was me at my worst in burnout, was just numb,
mm.
apathetic, which again, you would hope you never hear coming from a pastor's mouth. But that was the reality at my worst in burnout,
Yeah.
was numb.
Other than family or work, what gives you purpose?
So of course, as a person of faith, I'm going to say that God does, and he really does.
Yeah.
Like, he gives me a sense of identity, belonging, mission. He is the source of my values. Yeah. If I didn't have God in my life in that way, I don't know if I would have a sense of purpose to
Mm.
the extent that I do now.
What guilty pleasure brings you joy?
Okay, so I'm a pescatarian, technically. Vegetarian, but I do eat some fish and dairy and all that jazz. I don't eat red meat, but my guilty pleasure is smelling red meats as it's being cooked. Like, oh my gosh,
Ah,
meat on the grill, on the stove, in the oven, wherever it's being cooked, I'm there. And I'm just free smells, guys.
that's great. Oh, that's great. Okay, how do you celebrate a win?
Oh, so this is something that I'm growing in because, um, of course, when burnout was at its deepest, it was hard to even see a win, let alone celebrate it.
Yeah.
But now my small step towards celebrating a win is just like sitting back and taking a moment to just relish that state of feeling accomplished, what that feels like in my body, the energizing feeling of it, and just really taking a moment to thank God for that win.
How do you bounce back after a loss?
I think taking the time to grieve
Mhm.
that loss. And I don't just mean like a loss of someone to death, but really any loss, I think entails some form of grief. So this was something that I experienced recently, even though I knew that God was leading me towards exiting my role.
Hmm.
Um, there was a very real sense of loss and grief that I had to go through, even though I had clarity regarding my decision. So I think that was vital for me to move forward with leaving my job, is just giving myself permission to be like, hey, this is and will be a loss. So let's process it. Let's give ourselves time to grieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Who was the last person you expressed gratitude towards?
Okay, this is going to sound cliche, but it is also God. Like just and I think that's also been a vital part of my recovery,
Yeah.
is having this perspective of gratitude,
Yeah.
which has, I think, become more of a daily thing. Something that I think burnout me would not have expected to find myself in, because burnout me was not grateful for anything.
Yeah.
Like even if someone gave their gratitude to me, I'd be skeptical. Like, what do you want from me? Like, what
Right.
what do you really want? You know,
Yeah.
like, so to come to this state of gratitude, especially towards God, yeah, I think that also is a key step in that recovery. So I'm really grateful for that.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell your 25-year-old self?
I think I would tell her that life is so much more than accumulation or accomplishments
Mhm.
or accolades, all those things, because that was very important to me at that time. And I think too, that was a point where I was experiencing burnout. So
Yeah.
like not feeling like I was accumulating or accomplishing or receiving accolades was like, oh, I must be a failure, but just like, nah, 25-year-old me, there's so much more. There's so much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, Chelsy, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you sharing. Loved hearing how much aligned we are in our thinking. Again, some of these things that you're talking about, you don't hear all the time. And so I appreciate you sharing that, and thank you for being here. And
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
yeah,
Again, super excited to have shared from my experience, and I hope that it's something that resonates with others who may be experiencing burnout, or maybe others who know of someone who's
yeah,
experiencing burnout and
yeah.
can be that support for that person.
Absolutely. And we're going to put some links in the show notes for how to connect with you on LinkedIn. I know you sent me some videos of your teachings on burnout. And so those were great. I'll put those up as well. And we will just make that available to everybody who is listening. So thank you again. Appreciate it. And that is the show for today. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed hearing Chelsy's story. Check out the show notes. I just mentioned those. You can find them at holisticproductivity.com. We will put a link as well in your podcast platform, however you are listening to the show or watching it on YouTube. While you're there checking out the show notes, make sure that you like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. That way you'll get the next show as soon as it drops on Tuesday. I think you know by now we drop them on Tuesday. If you've been following along, if this is your first first episode that you're listening, we drop new episodes on Tuesday. I don't want to assume anything. So check that out. Best way, just like, follow, subscribe, and you won't miss anything. If you liked this show, if you found what Chelsy had to say valuable, we'd love to have you rate the show. We love seeing 5 stars. And so you can do that on your platform as well. And be sure to follow at Wholistic Productivity on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, LinkedIn, YouTube, Substack, all the social medias. There's a lot of great information, productivity tips that I bring throughout the week, motivation, things that Chelsy and I have been talking about today. A lot of that stuff you'll hear. And so that is a great way to stay connected with the show. Another great way is by joining the Holistic Productivity community on School. This online community is growing. It's fantastic. It's a whole bunch of people that are focused on helping each other through these areas of productivity, of burnout, of just life and how we face it and how we approach it. There's a lot of great resources on there. Here's the really cool thing. I have made everything that you want to do on School absolutely free. It doesn't cost you anything. If you don't want to pay for anything, it's free. So go do that. Check that out. Link will be in the show notes for that as well. Again, thank you so much for being here and investing in your goals, in your mental health, in your productivity. The reason that I do this, my goal for the show is to help you dream big, plan smart, and live fully. And I can't wait to see how that plays out in your life and with your goals. So thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. Take care.